Fictional worlds tend to have a really grand scope. When world building, we take many ideas and tie them together into one big construct. The more we add, the more interesting and deep our world becomes, to a degree. Sometimes trying to include everything can harm our world, blurring the things that make it unique. So there's definitely a threshold of diminishing returns in there. But even before we hit that threshold, it's possible that our world will begin to lose shape, becoming too generic or too scattered in concept. That is often the mark of a faulty foundation. When our world has a strong foundation, it becomes easy to maintain the same tone and themes that make it unique, which in turn helps our players understand our setting and become more invested in the game. So the goal of this lesson is to give you the tools to create a solid foundation for your world. We'll introduce a concept that's called pillars of world building, which we'll expand upon thoroughly in a minute. But before then, I want to talk about an important distinction between world and setting. A world is vast, far beyond the reaches of what anyone could have planned for in a game. It contains continents, cities, people, events, factions, and many more features, most of which haven't even been imagined yet. A setting, on the other hand, is the focus of a story and is contained within the world. If we take a D&D game as an example, the world is Faerun, or Eberron, or Ravnica. And the setting is the adventure being played within the world, the people of the cities the party visits, the dark forest they must trek through, the villain they are trying to stop, and so on. But the faraway city the characters haven't heard of is not a part of the setting. Not yet. When the characters finish their current adventure and move elsewhere, elements from the world can be brought into the forefront of the setting. A good example for the difference between world and setting comes from the Harry Potter movies. Each of them happens in the same world, but each movie has a different setting. The Harry Potter saga revolves mainly around the protagonist, or hero, Harry Potter. But in a later movie, Magic Beasts and Where to Find Them, he is irrelevant to the setting, despite it being the same world with the same core assumptions. Let's talk more about these core assumptions, or as I like to call them, pillars. Pillars are the core truths of your fictional world, simple phrases that profoundly influence our viewpoint of the world. These could be themes that you want to establish and repeat, or narrative constraints that you want to enforce on the world. For example, the gods fight each other and constantly meddle in human affairs could be one pillar. Magic is not native to the world is another. In a world that is built on these two pillars, we can infer that the gods are in fact aliens. So how are pillars useful to us? First, pillars help us remain consistent as we develop the world. Remembering that magic is not native to our world means that we will automatically think, where does this magic come from, wherever we present a new magical phenomenon. The second benefit of pillars is that they make it easier to develop and even improvise parts of our world. Knowing that the gods fight each other and constantly meddle in human affairs allows us to blame them on things that randomly happen, or just use their divine squabbles when we need a new idea for a conflict. You may be wondering what makes a certain pillar a good fit for your world. And that's a valid thought, because our definition for pillar is quite broad. The answer lies in the genre of the story we want to tell in our world. So the gods fight each other and constantly meddle in human affairs is an excellent pillar for epic heroic quests inspired by Greek mythology. It fits the genre that we want for our game. If we wanted to run a cyberpunk game where the characters resist the government's oppression, then we would need other pillars to build a world that supports that kind of story. In games like Dungeons & Dragons, most people use a genre called heroic fantasy, where the heroes tackle terrible dangers and achieve great feats of, well, heroism. Let's take a look at the 5 pillars of classic D&D worlds. The first pillar is gods oversee the world. The gods are real and embody a variety of beliefs, with each god claiming dominion over an aspect of the world. While some folk might refuse to honor the gods, none can really deny their existence. The second pillar is much of the world is untamed. Wild regions are common. People know the area they live in well. They've heard stories of other places from merchants and travelers, but very few know what lies beyond the mountains or in the depths of the great forest on the horizon. The world is ancient, is the third pillar. Empires rise and fall, leaving few places that have been untouched by imperial grandeur or decay. Ancient civilizations and their knowledge survive in legends, magic items, and ruins. The fourth pillar is the world is magical. Practitioners of magic are relatively few in number, but they leave evidence of their craft everywhere. Beyond the realms of civilization, stashes of magic items are guarded by magic traps inside magically constructed dungeons inhabited by monsters created by magic, cursed by magic, or endowed with magical abilities, and so on. The fifth pillar is conflict shapes the world's history. Powerful people strive to make their mark on the world, and factions of like-minded individuals can alter the course of history. Factions include religions led by charismatic prophets, kingdoms ruled by lasting dynasties, and shadowy societies that seek to master long-lost magic. These factions inevitably collide, creating conflict that can steer the world's fate. This pillar is actually vital for any world because conflict is the fuel for storytelling. But we'll talk more on that in the next chapter of this course, Story Design. I didn't make these pillars myself, by the way. They are actually taken from the official Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition. If you take the pillars from that list and use them to build your world, it will be ideal for D&D games. The pillars of D&D create a classic fantasy world that will feel familiar to the players, so it serves as a great foundation. But we game masters love breaking the mold, so let's see what happens when we add, remove, or alter pillars from that list. A good example of that would be the world of Eberron. In Eberron, magic is used to create modern-like wonders. The use of magic is an everyday occurrence, as magical flying ships and trains carry travelers from one great city to another. In terms of pillars, the world is magical was changed into magic is everywhere. Altering the pillars for Eberron created a world that feels more modern, which better supports noir stories, heists, and complex politics. So how can we do it? How can we develop new pillars for our worlds? When we begin world building, we will often have a few pillars that are easy to come up with, either because we took them from D&D or because they make sense for the kind of story that we want to tell in that world. Other pillars will require more thought. But the important thing to remember is that we don't have to think of all the pillars right away, because world building is a gradual process. As we build the world and add new elements into it, they will resonate with existing pillars or inspire new ones. So if there's an idea that you want to include in your world, simply throw it in and see if the pillars you already have align with it. If the pillars contradict your idea, you may want to tweak one of your pillars to accommodate it. It's also possible that the pillars won't contradict your idea, but will not support it either. If that's the case, you can either leave things as they are, or find a new pillar to reinforce the idea as a recurring theme in your world. In my homebrew world, Eleanor, spirits are beings born of emotion. A child imagining fiends in their closet might create a spirit of fear. A city guard that defends an innocent from a thug could conjure a spirit of valor. When developing my world, I considered how spirits are created and figured that in Eleanor, emotions have magic to them. They produce an ephemeral essence that spirits are made of. I felt that the world is magical pillar somewhat works with this idea, but the foundation was a bit shaky, and I wanted spirits to be a major theme in my world. So I added the following two pillars. Emotions and memories produce magical essence, and spirits are everywhere. I used these pillars as guidelines for everything else I came up with in my world, and that made the process a lot easier. When we add new pillars, we should make sure they don't contradict existing ones, and that's usually easy to do. But there's a caveat to removing pillars that we should pay attention to, as it may require changes to the game system. For example, if we remove the pillar gods oversee the world and create a world with no gods for a D&D game, we'll need to consider what happens with the cleric class, right? Because rules as written, they rely on divine entities for magic. Perhaps they rely on elemental magic instead. How would that change impact their abilities? Perhaps channel divinity needs to be reflavored to rely on elemental magic rather than divine. There is no right answer here, but it's something to keep in mind when playing with the core foundations of our worlds. Let's take a few minutes to practice some of the things we've learned in this lesson. Use the world building worksheet to practice identifying pillars of the world in one of your favorite fictional stories. It could be a world from a TV show, movie, a book series, or any other medium. Before you start, I highly recommend checking out the resources section of this chapter. The world building resource is intended for use as you are world building for your games. Take a look at it now for inspiration as you fill the first section of the worksheet. You can make a new copy of the resource for each new world you design. Once you're done identifying pillars on your worksheet, jump on over to lesson 2, where we will discuss world building elements. See you there!